port's open.
Holy Happy Hour, Batman. It is Friday, and that means it's Holy Happy Hour, Batman. I'm Father Ben. I'm an Episcopal priest, gamer, streamer, podcast host, and co-founder of the All Ports Open Network. On this show, I'm joined by heroes of the gaming and geek world to talk about life, faith, game design, spirituality, world building, and basically whatever else comes up. So today's show I'm very excited about. I have an awesome guest. I'm going to be joined in a few minutes by the game designer Beau Sheldon from Thoughty Games. Beau is the creator of the script change safety toolset you might be aware of, also designer of great games like Turn, which is an RPG about small town shapeshifters. So I'm really excited to have Beau on the show. We rescheduled this from a couple weeks ago, and I'm just very thrilled that we were able to work out today. So this is going to be a really fun episode. Before Beau comes on the show, a few housekeeping things that I want to go over here at the Holy Happy Hour with you all. This is the last episode that I have scheduled for the month of July. Beginning in August, we're going to make a big change to our show in that we're going to move the happy hour from Fridays, I know it's so sad, to Mondays at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll go from 7:30 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And it'll be back-to-back with another new network show in the All Ports Open Network that'll be at 9 p.m. called Branching Paths with Kimber and Josh. It'll be on the All Ports Open Twitch channel. So I'm hoping 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Mondays is an easier time for you all to join the stream. I'm hoping it'll help us bring new people into watching the show. And it'll give us a little extra time with our guests too, because we're going to format an hour and a half right out the gate. So I'm really excited about that. I'm scheduling great guests for the month of August. Already I have the hosts of the Design Doc podcast, Hannah Schaefer and Evan Rowland, are coming on the show. Also, I'm going to be having filmmaker and game designer Grant Ellis scheduled for 2 different Mondays in August. So if you want to keep up with all things Holy Happy Hour, don't forget to hit the follow button right down there so you don't miss a thing. Now, it is happy hour here at Holy Happy Hour Batman. And so, as usual, I have a beverage inspired by today's guest. That's what I usually do around here. And so I have a cocktail today, and it is called Frame by Frame. It's inspired by the script change safety tool set. So because of that, and because it's called Frame by Frame, this is an easy drinking, low alcohol beverage for taking things slow. So if I can not screw this up in OBS, okay, I am one step closer. I'm going to bring it up on the screen for you all. So there it is, Frame by Frame. I'm going to get a little bigger so that's easier for folks to read. It'll just kind of block my face. This is a mix of lemon juice, lush grenadine, and a kind of, okay, so none of you are probably ever going to make this cocktail because it involves a really interesting liqueur called pecan. It's a French liqueur called pecan. It's kind of like bitter. It's made from red wine that's turned into a liqueur. But also, so it has like orange peel and red wine notes. But I use the Philadelphia-based New Liberty Distillery Liberty Bell American Pecan Bitters for this drink. So it's lemon juice, lush grenadine, the pecan, and I sort of shook that up in a cocktail shaker, poured out over ice, topped it off with club soda. The liqueur is like 30% alcohol by volume, so this is extremely if you like red wine. And I guess I can make it go away so you can see my face again. If you like red wine, but you don't like to drink red wine in the summer because it's just too hot where you are, that's how I feel. This is a great cocktail for that. You can see it kind of has that red wine color, kind of really nice color, and some red wine flavors with a little bit of citrus. It's very light and refreshing summer cocktail. And like I said, my inspiration here was to sort of take things slow, which sometimes is really smart to do. When you are involving alcohol and whatever it is you're doing. So that's my cocktail for this week. Okay, so I'm going to switch on over to bringing on our guest this week, game designer Beau Sheldon. I'm very excited for Beau to be on the show. And so let's go ahead and bring them on. Beau, welcome to Holy Happy Hour Batman.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So how are you doing this Friday?
I am doing pretty good. It's a itch.io creator day, so there's lots of game designers posting awesome stuff. My stuff is up. There are tons of reverse sales and sales on all over Twitter and all over Itch that kind of just brightened my day to see a lot of people putting their stuff out there.
That's so cool. Now, here's what's crazy. I'm not sure how I missed that today, but I totally did. I had no idea.
It's never well advertised, but it's a huge boon to the creators because we get basically full rewards for our labors and get the full amount of our sales. And it's really cool. And a lot of creators this time around, instead of doing sales, did reverse sales where they increased the price, which is basically a big boost for their finances and often is getting them closer to being paid fairly for the work they do.
Yeah, that's amazing. So where can folks find your Itch? Like, what's your Itch address?
Mine is brebeau.itch.io. So that's BRIEBEAU.itch.io. And it has all of my main stuff on there. I have stuff on like Drive-Thru RPG and Indie Press Revolution as well, but my main site where I go for sales is through Itch, and that's where you can find Script Change and Turn as well.
Cool. Yeah, it's in my like script to say at the end of the show too, so folks will hear it at the end of the show. It's where I found Script Change. I actually own Turn from Kickstarter. I was trying to find my copy of it because I swore that I got a physical copy of that game, but I could not find it in my book. So then I'm like, did I only get a PDF copy of it? Like, did I not back at a physical level? And I couldn't remember. But anyway, that's so awesome. I'm so glad you're able to share that today here. And I told Beau that I was dealing with my puppy in the emergency room. Well, not the the dog emergency room, the emergency visit to a pet hospital this morning. So I wasn't like my normal online self today. And so I think I just missed all of that today with people sharing their Itch stuff. And I'm kind of bummed about that.
Yeah, I think that especially as small creators, the algorithms don't generally favor us either. So it is something that I like to always draw attention to because if you just look at my Twitter at the stuff that I've retweeted or search for the Creator Day tag, there's so many people who have made amazing things. Even just go to Itch and look for your favorite genre. I'm sure you'll find something amazing.
Super cool. So I hope folks definitely go and do that for sure. So I guess let's talk about you. Give people a little bit. If people don't know you or much about your work, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I have been in game design for close to 10 years now, coming up on a decade, and I've been playing tabletop RPGs and role-playing games of various types since I was like extremely young, like single digits age, basically starting text RP on like forums and stuff back in the day. Cool. And I played everything from D&D to Fiasco to Archipelago and stuff I facile like Shadowrun and everything as well. Just lots of variety in my gaming experiences, and I've done some live action role play as well. And my game design has been basically like split between freelance work and my own creative work. I did a bunch of freelance stuff earlier on in my career and over time for things like Firefly, The Smuggler's Guide to the Rim, The Sound of Dew, and a couple of different major projects, including one with FASA for 1879. And then I ended up deciding I wanted to focus a lot more on my own work. And that's how I got into doing a bunch of smaller games, but especially things like Turn and The Man and the Stag, and supporting other creators on their projects. And all throughout that, I've done a lot of safety work, safety consultation, as well as design. And Script Change is my kind of toolbox of safety tools for content and consent and stuff like that as well. And it's kind of themed after like old VHS and video stuff because a lot of that language is in our parlance, so it's easier for people to pick up. And it's been basically invaluable to me as a player, and that's why I made it initially. And seeing other people pick it up, like Evil Hat even made buttons for Roll20 that they released recently.
So cool.
So yeah, it's been a lot. I've been in games for a while, and I used to do a lot of conventions, but I've been kind of tapering down to focus more on my creative side as I've gone through a lot of health and well-being stuff in the past year.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's generally me.
Yeah. One of the things I was curious about asking you about Script Change is sort of, you mentioned it being based on the, like, or movie terms or, you said VHS sort of terms. which is funny that you said that's in our lexicon, because I don't think it is for my children. I don't know that my, like, you know what I mean, that my next generation of my kids, fast forward, rewind, I don't know if they know those terms. But anyway, they're only role playing a little bit anyway, so I don't think it really matters for them too much. But anyway, my question was really like how you ended up using that kind of language, like how that was, where that came from as inspiration.
So thankfully, even today, we still do use this kind of language for stuff like fast forwarding on Netflix, or like using music players and stuff like that. But I think that for me, the big thing is whenever I was starting it out, I was originally going to use it just for a cinematic game that I was working on, but we decided to set back the game that we were working on, and I realized the script change was something I still wanted to build and develop. But I wanted to keep it as something that would be easy for people to remember, especially people who were playing games in the same kind of era that I was. And most of us were very familiar with those kind of concepts, and tying it to like movies and stuff like that, like framings and scenes and stuff like that, does work largely for games. And so I wanted to keep that kind of framing, in part because it reminds us that we are not deeply immersed so much that we can't pull out for a moment and like pause and take a breath and like reassess things and change the story that we're working within, because in the end we are the directors. We are controlling the story, and changing the script is okay. Like, you don't have to accept what happens naturally. You can frame it in the way that you want to have a happier and safer time.
Yeah. So did you get interested, like, did you experience any safety tools that inspired you to want to design a tool set, or was it just like a lack or a need for safety at the table that kind of led you to want to develop one?
So whenever I initially started into tabletop RPGs, the games I was playing had like no concept of that kind of stuff. But whenever I moved towards indie games, I played some games like Monster Hearts and Apocalypse World and things like that, that had typically the X card by John Stavropoulos, and the O card, which was added by Kira McGran, and Lines and Veils, which is by Ron Edwards. And they were all great tools. I've literally written articles before about how great they were in their own right, but they weren't satisfying the needs that I had. And my desire for clarity and conversation and kind of breaking things down into a more structural and complex way of addressing things that come up in game. And I still think that those tools are great for people who enjoy them and who find them useful. But for me, I needed something more structured, and I thought I can't be the only one, right? Like, if I'm feeling this way, maybe other people do. And largely I found that there are a lot of people who do find it useful. Especially, I think it can be useful for a lot of neurodivergent people. For example, the Bodana group is a games therapy group, and they use script change for all of their games. So cool. I just think it's, there are plenty of great safety tools out there, and many that have come after me as well. But for me, like, script change was to satisfy the needs I thought were there and that I felt the most. And I hoped that they were reflected, and they turned out to be. Yeah.
One of the things I just love about script change especially is the fact that, like, one of the, I don't know if moves is the right word, but one of the things you can do in it is the instant replay. And what I love about that is, like, it's not just stopping, or it's not just, it's like script change also gives the option to celebrate something really positive built in. And I just love that about it. I love that it has that as one of its primary mechanisms. It's celebrating something that went well.
Framing some stuff as positive for me is like an essential part of safety, because it reinforces positive behaviors and like encourages us to focus on like pursuing what we want to see, rather than just trying so hard to avoid the things that could be harmful to us. And like, there are a lot of ways of approaching gaming, and some people only approach it basically as like pleasure seeking, like what makes me happy, what makes me feel good. And some people play it to explore difficult things and like get over things that are hard for them and stuff like that. But I wanted script change to kind of allow you to address the difficult things while still encouraging you to embrace and celebrate like the good stuff. And that's why the most recent update included the Pix, Squix, and Ix, which is basically a elaboration and kind of complexity-driven version of Lines and Veils, because I wanted a similar thing where it's like you have some stuff that you don't want to see a lot of, or you'd like to see it modified. You have some stuff you don't want to see at all, but you also have some stuff you really want to see.
Yeah.
And I wanted people to have the ability to assign tools to address the difficult stuff as part of the thing that they were doing, so that if you want to specifically always fade to black if this topic comes up, you can do that. So you'd always fast forward every time it happens. Or you can just skip it entirely. But also you can be like, hey, everybody said they really want to see like friendship. So let's play towards friendship. Let's like do that. Let's have those behaviors in game that lead to those kinds of stories.
Yeah.
And it's been really, really great so far seeing it in play.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I want to talk about Turn, because I'm hoping if we talk about Turn, I think it's like a good gateway to getting to know you better, because tell me if I'm wrong. Oh, someone's knocking on my door. Tell me if you're wrong, but it seems like Turn is sort of like what would be the right term for it? Like it really kind of embodies you a lot in that game. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of me. Yeah. So I started designing Turn in like 2013. And it kind of just sat in my head, like basically fully formed Athena, like just like chilling for a while. But I was so afraid to write it down because I was so worried that it would be bad, because it was so personal and so important to me.
I know.
And then
I can relate to that.
Like,
I definitely relate to that.
Yeah. It's such a struggle, because like sometimes stuff just is, you're so passionate about it and you want it to be good, but you're like, oh, what is bad whenever I put it down on paper?
Oh my gosh.
And
yes.
then my spouse, John, I basically like told him the gist of it, and he was like, you need to write this down. Like you have to. And in like 2 weeks, I wrote down like the whole thing. Everything except for the essays, which were basically the way I expanded it. But all the base rules were there. They barely got modified going forward.
Okay.
And all we did was like clarity revisions and some tinkering, but like it never took any big revisions after that point. And I was very grateful, because like I'm so bad at edits. It's literally my worst thing in the world. But whenever I like explained it to John initially, like I had a really hard time explaining the original mechanic, and I got really discouraged. But then I had a head injury in 2017, and I was extremely glad that I had written it down, because I could not remember basically any of it. And whenever I went back to it, it was like basically getting flooded with all sorts of like complex and difficult emotions, because I remembered why I wrote all the stuff down that I did. And I had to kind of like re-encounter that. And that's how I ended up writing all the essays, to kind of explain like the purpose behind things, why things were meant to be designed this way, why you had to play this way, what you should include. And a lot of that came down to, this is partially to like give you the experience of being in a small rural town, which is extremely hard to do if you don't know what that means. So I talked a lot about class, and I talked about religion, and I talked about a whole bunch of stuff, including like queerness and gender identity, and how like being closeted in a small town is just as scary as people imagine, but being out in a small town is sometimes scarier. And that's to some degree the kind of experience of being marginalized while hiding behind a facade. But also that facade is you too, and trying to come to terms with the balance between those is part of Turn. And I brought in a woman of color to write about race for the game, because I wanted to show that as part of the experience. And I think that largely like the game encapsulates a lot of what I experienced, and also from the people that I talked to while I was writing the essays and stuff, captures a lot of other people's like feelings of being like someone very different in a place where you are meant to be the same, and the risk of being different is a lot of danger. And trying to find out whether you can change the community around you to accept you, or whether you have to change yourself, and which part of that is going to be okay for you.
So your background is pretty clearly small rural America, is that right?
Yeah, I grew up in some very small rural towns in southwestern Pennsylvania, some of which actually are referenced in the Night in the Woods game as influence, which I found really common influence while watching the videos, like playthroughs of the game and stuff. Just like, oh, I didn't even know that was the same, but yeah, I guess that's it. But small town is in PA. It's very industrialized, very like heavily wooded. There's lots of animals, but there's also lots of business and industry encroaching on that space. And there's a lot of poverty and high contrast with people who do have wealth in the area. Yeah. And isolation and stuff are also like a really huge factor there.
Yeah.
I live in the city, so.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, so I grew up in, what was at the time, rural Bucks County, Pennsylvania. So that's East Pennsylvania. Right. So, but it was a small town, but like my background for like my family, like my dad, so basically in the same area of Bucks County when my dad grew up and my mom and then my grandparents especially, like it was even more rural, even more poverty, right? And so what's crazy to me is just like how much that's flipped, because where I was from in Pennsylvania, Bucks County, is not only not rural anymore, it's definitely suburban now. And it's also very much not poverty. I mean, I'm sure what there really is like a contrast between poverty that still exists and remains next to affluence, which is also everywhere. And it's just crazy. But yeah, so I'm interested in this growing up, like this experience of growing up in a small town, and this idea of like the desire you had to design a game around like the homogeneity that you expressed. You want to say more about that? I guess like the idea of like what about small town invokes like homogeneity, the idea that everyone here is supposed to be the same.
So where I grew up, in every town that I grew up as a kid, I only moved a couple of times and very close together kind of moves. There were not really like people who were different where I was. So we rarely saw people of color in the very small area that I grew up in until we ventured away from home. And even then they were seen with like this lens of othering, they are different, they are bad. There was an exceptional amount of racism in a lot of the communities that I was in or near growing up. And as well as that, things like ableism, even the disabled people in the community were not kind or caring for disabled people. Like my mom is disabled, and her attitude towards disabled people is not super great. And it did not help me as a disabled kid. And queerness, like I knew like a lesbian and she was the subject of a lot of mistreatment and a lot of disrespect and fetishization and all of this kind of stuff. And it led to a lot of difficulty for her in her life. And the only other queer person that I knew of in relation to me and any connection to me for like pretty much my whole life was a cousin in Arizona who the only thing I was ever taught about him was that he was HIV positive. And I knew that I was not a girl whenever I was very, very young. Like, I just didn't know what it was. I just felt weird and wrong all the time. And it wasn't like I was like, I know I was trans, because that's not what it was. We didn't even have a word for that except for slurs where I came from. Like, we didn't talk about that kind of thing. And so as I got older and like I tried to experiment, like I would like dress up like a boy and go to the horse club, and I got the crap beat out of me. You know, like it was not a space where like being in any way different was okay. And this was reinforced not just by things like not being able to get like work or being able to find friends or anything like that, but like I was also homeschooled.
Okay.
And whenever I was around 12, I confessed to one of my friends who was a girl that I was attracted to girls. And so she stopped being friends with me, and the local high school decided that it was just a really good time to focus on me as basically a person to throw slurs at and spread rumors about. And on top of that, there were like all sorts of lies and implications thrown around in the process. And that was just the environment that I was in. Yeah. Like, and if you stepped out of line, the violence was either verbal or physical, and it was going to happen. And I don't know what people of color in my community experience, because I was not even allowed to speak to them. At times I had foster siblings who were people of color, specifically like a Black sister and a Black brother at one point that lived with me. And the way my parents treated them, the way our community treated them, I know now was not okay. Yeah. But I was a child at the time and thought that that was how it was supposed to be. Yeah. And it was so messed up. And like, even our church was like that. Like I was a part of a Brethren church, and I was highly religious until I was around 15.
Okay.
And I went to church every chance I got. I was in Awana. I went to services. I sang in the choir. And they started spreading rumors about my sister and me, saying that we were doing drugs or sleeping around and we were going to get pregnant and that we were slutty and like all of this stuff. And it was excruciatingly white church. Yeah. Like I remember a few times people like briefly visiting and then never coming back. Yeah. And it was hard. And it was the demand to be like within the boxes that we were given initially was very strong. And the older I got, the harder they pushed for it. Wanting me to have kids and wanting me to, have, heterosexual life, and like being upset when I moved to Penn Hills, where like there were a lot more Black people, and being worried about my safety as though it was more dangerous. And it was hard. And like, I don't think all small towns are like that. Absolutely. But in my experience, many can be like that. And whenever I talk to a lot of other people about their experiences in small towns, I felt the same kind of thing reflected back. Is like, yeah, it sometimes is good. And there's sometimes good things. The community can be beautiful, but you also are expected to meet expectations. Yeah. And if you don't, and if those expectations are something you can't meet, you're no longer a part of the community.
I think that's the part of the story that I think is not told a lot of times about small town, which is the part where if you can't, like you said, if you can't meet those expectations, if you don't fit into the homogeneity, what happens to you? We see it kind of like the way I think it's depicted in television and movies about small towns often is like, that's the person who then leaves. You know what I mean? It's you have the black sheep member of the family. They've left, and maybe in this episode they're coming home and like they don't fit in here. But it doesn't like that. That trope. Do you know what I'm talking about? I feel like that's
the like achievement of leaving the town is like this big thing, and like it's something they always strive towards. But the reality is, especially in like certain places in the United States, you cannot leave. It does not matter how different you are. You are stuck there until you die. And like, there are financial reasons for that. There's all sorts of kinds of things that keep people in those places. And part of the reason why I designed Turn to require that you cannot leave the town is because of that. Because while, yes, I did actually move away from small towns. I live a couple hours away from my parents, effectively. I'm still tied to that town. Like, my whole family is there. Right. A part of me never will leave, no matter how hard I try. And I wanted to represent that emotional connection, but also recognize the people who are genuinely stuck and who maybe want to go outside the borders, who want to go somewhere different, and who may never be able to, whether it's because of their body, their minds, or their economic situation. They're stuck. Yeah. And I love small towns a lot in a lot of ways, but they come with a lot of baggage. And I want to, especially with games like Turn, like when we play it, we do the whole spectrum of the problems and the benefits. Like it is a really good way to like explore that experience of like, yes, there are a lot of very difficult things, but sometimes things can change. It just takes work and it takes time. And if they can't change, then what can you change to make your space safer by like building your own community within the community to protect yourself? Yeah. And it's been really, we've had some really beautiful, like genuine experiences, and it's literally the game that helped me find my name. Like whenever I was coming out and trying to figure out who I was. And if I hadn't had the space to explore the things that I dealt with as a kid and never had the words to give, I don't think I could ever gotten to where I am now.
Wow. Well, I have a lot of questions, but I want to kind of go.
I talk a lot. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. No, absolutely. I want to like kind of talk more about what you were just getting, but I want to kind of backtrack just a little bit before we lose it forever, which is, you mentioned going to church growing up, and I you mentioned the word brethren, and then just out of curiosity, when you say brethren, was it a Church of the Brethren? Was it I grew up in what's called Plymouth Brethren, or we would call it like Assemblies in Pennsylvania, or I'm just curious for your experience, like what kind of church it was.
So I was a member of a Grace Brethren church.
Okay.
I was baptized there. Okay. And Grace Brethren are, from what I understand of the church history, are basically like, there were the Brethrens and then they split and then there was another split. And that last little like,
that's the thing.
And they're the ones who are like, there's a literal lake of fire. You're going to burn in hell forever. Satan's an actual person.
Oh yeah. No.
All of that kind of stuff.
Right.
And, I found out recently whenever I was like talking, my spouse John, his father is a Baptist minister. I was a Baptist minister. And I was like explaining something I learned in church one day. And he was like, that is an apocryphal text. And I was like, that sounds appropriate. Because my church was a little bit unique. And we also participated heavily in Awanas, which is a major organization.
I grew up in Awana. So when you said Awana, I was like, we got to go back to that, because I grew up in Awana, and I really I was like, I can't lose that. Got to go back to that. Yeah, I grew up going to Awana also.
Oh my God, I recently went through some of my childhood things, which is this is so appropriate. And I found some of my old Awana books and stuff, and they were so appropriative of Native stuff that it is absolutely appalling. Like we had like arrowheads as our little markers for achievements, and like that we were braves, and I was like, oh my God, did not realize that then. But also like kind of culty feeling, and I know that may sound offensive, but like for me, looking back, like the way I was treated, the way I was expected to behave, the way it influenced my life, it feels a lot of the way that people who like between my church and Awanas combined, not solely Awanas, but the combination of the two, I don't know how I came out of it like functional in some ways, because I was so deeply into it. Like, and on top of all of these things, whenever I was very young, I was experiencing issues because of my bipolar disorder that I didn't understand, where I experienced psychosis and I would have hallucinations. And whenever like an 8-year-old is like, I see Jesus and he's holding my hand, and the church's response is, that's so great, that's good, and doesn't think that maybe something could be wrong, it shows that like the culture is not questioning things and not like trying to do improvement. And like there are a lot of things that were good about the church. They supported a lot of people in the community. My grandparents were devout until the day they died. But for me, the environment, especially in the younger contingent of people who became I would say like the Gen Xers and Boomers, like later people, they became very passionate about maintaining that homogeneity that I was talking about, and like wanting everyone to stay like to a specific way of behaving. And they used the things that we were being taught in Awana and the things we were being taught in Sunday school to try and like force that. And around 15, I just kind of had a breaking point with it and left. But I was like, I did Bible drills. I had like all of the like awards. I did all of the skits, and like it was, Awana was a trip.
I'm a Timothy Award winner. I talk about that sometimes on the show with other people who come out of Awana, which if people don't know is like a certain level of achievement you've done Awana for a certain number of years to get that award. Bible, and for people who don't know what Awana is, like it's a lot of Bible memorization. You're memorizing Bible verses. It is a trip. It really is. I lost a thought that I had based on what you just said. Darn it.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not your fault. I distracted myself by talking with what I just said, but totally lost. I had something that you said that I wanted to hit on, but I don't know. It is wild. I sometimes wonder. I know what it was. Talking about the homogeny. So like that was my experience too. My experience was I didn't get out at 15. That's pretty young, right? To like have your breaking point. It was 15. That's pretty. Yeah, it's pretty young. I
grew up. I was turning 15 in like 2003, which was basically like the hit of like the internet. Me, like that's when I met my partner, my husband John, and that's when like I was starting to finally like meet people outside of my bubble. I started working at the Renaissance Festival because my mom wanted a chance to go more regularly, and that was kind of a good way to do it. And I wanted to do it, but I was not expecting, basically realizing that the world was such a different place once I got there. And I was also online actively, like super actively from like age 11 onward. And by the time I was 15, I was going to school online in high school. And 2 years earlier, when 9/11 had happened, on the same day, I started 8th grade in my first class with other students since kindergarten.
Wow.
Which was still online. But in that class were Muslim people that were like fellow students. There were like other students who were Muslim, and I was like, hey, it's 9/11, basically. Like everything was happening that day. And it was literally one of my first exposures to other religions. And the response by my church was really not good. And the response by my community was really not good. Meanwhile, my fellow students were people who were affected by it on the opposite side of the like equation that I was being given. And I could not see them as the villain. And I had like 2 years of getting exposed to stuff like that before I was like finally able to go out and like see people face to face that were different from me. And I was just like, yeah, I can't, this is not making sense. Like there are queer people here. There are people who are like people of color from different religions who are like pagan and like all sorts of stuff like that. And I could not reconcile those things and still continue participating in my church while my church was actively attacking me and my sister. It was a terrible collision of events, but it was what basically led me to leave the church.
Yeah. In my experience, so I wonder in a lot of ways what if I wasn't just slightly older than you. I wonder if I had the internet at a different age, if I had it's 2002, I was graduating high school, right? 9/11, I was a senior. I remember exactly where I was on 9/11, as many people in our generation, I'm sure, do. But I wonder, my experience was that the people slightly older than me, especially like Gen Xers in my church, they were the ones that very much were doubling down on that homogeny. Like anyone that thought outside of their box was no longer it wasn't okay. It wasn't welcome. When I first went to college, before I even get to that, an example was just like reading Harry Potter. Like just reading Harry Potter was just not acceptable, right? Like just completely unacceptable. And then when I went to college, the reason why my parents basically broke away from our church was that I went to college, and I went to a Christian college. And it was, but it wasn't the right Christian college. You know what I mean? And the homogeny wasn't the same. And I studied philosophy as my philosophy degree in my undergrad, and that was not acceptable. So studying philosophy at a Christian university was outside of the box for this particular church. And that was like me doing that was just the breaking point for my family being part of that church, because basically the way it was framed for my parents was like, either you stop your child who's an adult from studying this thing in college, or like there's not space for you here. And like, so that's just the that's my experience of like the way there's that homogeny reinforcement. And it just pushed us right out because there wasn't
our church was like very, very precise about like, you have to make sure you come to church every Sunday. And if you don't, you must automatically be sinners. And they would like find out all these reasons why you'd be bad. They were also like a temperance church. So there's no drinking, there's no dancing. And like my family was not good at abiding by that. Like my dad was a DJ who grew up in the 70s. Like that's not going to be a thing for him. And like, I think the hardest thing was like, they really it wasn't just like any big difference that mattered. It was even things that I considered to be small. Like they questioned whenever even my grandparents who were part of the church questioned me going to a school that was Catholic, because that's where I went to go for my degree. And they were like, oh, won't they teach you like the wrong things there? And I'm like, I'm not taking religious classes. I'm going for a completely different degree. Like, it just happens to be a Catholic school. But like, I remember when my dad and my mom got married, my mom was Lutheran, and like she had to convert to his church and everything. And not just in a like, you can't get married, but like she was, even after that, always labeled negatively by the church because she had come from being a different religion. And I never could understand that. And that it's just the degree of, you can't be anything but exactly what we prescribe, that I could never align with, especially once I realized how different you could be.
Right.
And that was okay, I
mean, and it's as narrow as like, I was a certain kind of Plymouth Brethren, and there was a different kind, and there, even though we're like this close to each other in the broad spectrum of what is the Christian religion, we're this close together. Nope, those ones aren't okay. You got to be this one. And like it is comical. Like even you saying like she was a different religion, that's what's so comical about it, because like once you have a broad perspective on religion, like once you get out and you have I had to leave that denomination, I had to go get educated, at a university setting, to have a broad perspective, like, oh, that's what Christianity actually is. And once you actually like have that broad perspective, it's like, this is all the same religion. Like it's literally
it really is
one religion. And there are a few others. I mean, there's a bunch of other world religions. This is one of them, and you're all Christians. Some of you a little less so than others, maybe, but for the most part, you're all Christians. But the focus is so small. And so narrow in those environments. And when you're in it, I mean, this is what I can relate to, like when you're in it, man, you just like can't see outside of it almost. I guess that's one of those reasons why you get trapped in it. Like you were saying about the idea of being stuck or not able to leave.
Yeah. And I know I've known people who are like, who from my old, like places where I grew up, like different towns and stuff, who have reached out to me since I came out as non-binary masculine and since I came out as queer and polyamorous and everything. And they're like, yeah, I'm queer too, but like I can't really be out because I'm still like at the church and I still live in this town and it's not safe. And like I would lose everything I have. They wouldn't have a support system. Their family would completely eliminate contact with them. And they're like, I have nieces and nephews that I love. And like, I literally like barely see my own niece and nephew, in part because my sister-in-law doesn't seem to really like who I am as a person. And my brother just doesn't know how to deal with it. And so like, we're in contact, but like, I don't think if I asked that they would let me take the kids out on a little trip without my sister babysitting, you know what I mean? And it's like, they treat me differently in a way that I don't even think they always realize. And it is because they're still a part of the church. They still are part of Awanas. They still are part of the town. And they have those normalized rules and expectations. And I know it is so much harder for so many people than it is for me, especially because I was able to like move out and find somewhere to live and everything. But like, it is so hard to lose faith.
Yeah.
And with the faith, lose everything else you had.
Yeah.
And then try and like scrabble to hold on to everything you have and deny parts of yourself and pretend to be someone you're not for a really long time. And then finally, once you start accepting yourself, realize that the final pull of that, the final step of being who you are, is going to be losing your entire family legacy and everyone you ever loved. And it's just, I don't think people realize a lot of the time whenever we talk about like, oh, these people who live in these small towns, they're so bigoted, they're so problematic. Some of us want to get out, but we lose everything to do it. And that is a terrifying prospect. And a lot of it is tied to religion, but some of it is also just tied to like economics or like cultural ties and family ties. And it is scary to lose your church support group. Like I lost 30 friends, like of varying degrees of connection. I have family members who will probably never speak to me again. Thankfully, they're distant ones, but it's not like my relationships with my immediate family are super tight anymore either. Yeah. And it almost always comes back to, well, you should pray it'll make you feel better. It'll make you less sick. It'll make you feel more connected. You'll feel more yourself again. You'll be yourself again if you just pray and you just come back. And it's so hard because sometimes that feels like the right thing to do. But I also know if I go back to that, I lose all the work that I've done to be better, to care for people who are different from me, and to do the work that I need to do as like a person who largely comes from that kind of culture that has done harm. And I think it's hard because like, I think there are a lot of beautiful things about religion and spirituality. And like, I have tried repeatedly to pursue any kind of spirituality again, over and over.
Yeah.
But it often is just so traumatic to me that I can't do it. And the most I've been able to do is like watch other people be happy in faith.
Wow.
And then go home and just cry for a while and try and remember what it felt like whenever I sang in the choir.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you were able to carry any sort of spirituality out of that background into, you know, who you become in subsequently, you know, since. But it sounds
Not
like
really.
No. Yeah.
I mean, there are some things that I learned that I essentially try and carry forward, like things that I was taught, like that Jesus said or whatever, that like meant things to me about like the importance of caring for people and, you know, not punishing people economically and things like that, that I see in other religions and spiritualities as well, that I think are more universal rules of kindness and of generosity and love, and especially of caring. But I don't have the spark anymore. Like it's been gone for a long time. I actually was literally working in therapy about this a couple weeks ago because I was like, I had some very bad stuff that happened that was in relation to, you know, my religious experience and like the things like purity culture and stuff like that. And I look at who I am now and I'm like, the people who told me that God would love me were telling me that God would love a little girl with long brown hair and big blue eyes who sang real good at church on Sunday and who never swore and who was going to get married to a big, strong man who, you know, all he did was work all day. And I was supposed to have kids and I was supposed to do like a whole bunch of things that are just not who I am. And I'm not as repulsed these days as I was for a long time, but I have talked a lot to like my therapist and my partners and stuff about the fact that some days I genuinely long for like that feeling of like possessed passion that you get whenever you're singing along with the group of people and you're reading scripture and you're loving God.
Yeah.
But I cannot love a God that lets people be the way they were to me and to others. Yeah. And I don't begrudge anyone else that at all. If they have their way of feeling faith, that's totally great. But for me, it is gone. And I lament it to a degree, but I'm trying to find faith in people, which is a challenge in and of itself at times. Yeah. But it is a big thing. Like I think that a lot of people can get to the point where I am, especially with the way the world is today. It is hard to find your faith again when things are falling apart.
These stories as a Christian, as an active Christian, let alone a Christian minister, you know, let alone a professional Christian, as somebody that does have faith in the Christian God, in Jesus, you know, it's heartbreaking to me to hear so many of these stories, which I do hear some version of. It's all different. Of course, this is your story, but someone who's been hurt, harmed by religion, specifically Christian, in the name of Christian religion, right? To me, it's just so hard because it's like so much of what I see in the world today, especially in North America, calling itself Christian, has nothing to do with what I see as Christian or the God I know or the Jesus that I've come to know and have a relationship with from where I'm standing, from my perspective. And in fact, quite the opposite. if anything, it's what I would call anti-Christ or anti-Christian or anti-God or whatever. It's like the God of so much of what labels itself Christianity is despicable. A friend of mine, it's actually sitting here on my desk, but I have a friend who, and I think he thinks it's funny to and we get, it's not humorous actually. But he will collect Bible tracts because he works in a Walmart, and he'll get tons of them throughout the year, and he'll collect them and bring them down and go over, look at them with me. And we laugh at some of them, right? But it's not funny actually. And I think where we got to looking at them recently when we did this little exercise was go from oh haha to morbidly disgusted, like I said, the God described in these so-called Bible tracts, are such good news, is an evil villain, a despicable evil villain, and it's horrifying to me. So there's that, and then beyond that, the other thing based on what you said is stuff what we've also done is we've taken our cultural understandings and we've put them, attribute them to God, and we said this religion, following Jesus is being this cultural appearance. It's this version of existing in this town, in this place, and that's the same as being a follower of Jesus. When it has nothing to do with these cultural things, and so there's different versions of that. Because my church, as liberal and leftist and whatever as it is, still does some version of that where we say but our hymnal, our hymns, our prayer book, even being a Democrat, all of those things are what it looks like to be like us. And that's still a version of what you're describing. That's still a bad thing, right? Because we're still saying you have to look like this to be a part of this. And that's exactly what, and to me, that's not, again, from where I'm coming from, that's not anything to do with what Jesus is about. It's certainly what religion is about, though, I think. Well, not completely. I got to be careful what I say here. Not completely. But a religious tendency, right, is to say us, not them. It's to create other. I do think that... anyway, now I'm going off for a while on...
No, it's okay. I actually think that's a really good point. Part of the thing that sticks with me a lot about Christianity as a religion is, while yes, in history... Christians have been persecuted. In the modern world, by and large, they are lesser persecuted than many other groups. And I had a discussion with somebody recently where I was just I sometimes feel like many people I know who profess to be Christians but do not practice Jesus's values are the kind of people who seek out ways to feel persecuted because they feel it makes them closer to God and Jesus instead of acting in Jesus's path. And that was a lot of what I experienced in my youth as well, is people who are they wanted to basically martyr themselves in a way because that's how they get closer to God, not doing godly things and doing good things. And for me, that is a large part of the disconnect is I don't think that people should ever have to suffer to be worthy of love or care. I just don't believe in that. And I can't believe in that. And it just is so swept up in that thing that people seem to believe that you must, suffer, you must go through pain, you must go through some loss of some kind and sacrifice because Jesus sacrificed, so we have to sacrifice, which is against the entire principle of what Jesus did. And I think it kind of it hits a weird button in me as someone who I have been basically in pain for my entire adult life. And so when people come to me and say to me, well, you just sometimes have to sacrifice things. I'm I have sacrificed so many things. There is not a point at which any good God would ask me to give this much at this point without in some way speaking to me and telling me that something good is coming. Even in the Bible, he would communicate to people through their pain and encourage them. And that was not the life that I've had. And I think that we largely, like whenever we're like playing games and stuff like that, and we have like gods, a lot of the time they're like terrible gods, they're scary gods, they're not benevolent gods. And that's because a lot of us come from backgrounds where we're told that even the God that loves you is the one that's going to hurt you. And that is a painful thing to experience. And whenever I have been, I wrote a game called The Man and the Stag, and it's literally about a man, a human, a person who is isolated and who meets a stag, who is basically representative of the cosmos and is lived like a godlike creature. And the story is about their individual relationship and like kind of how like the god is not really bad or good. The cosmos is not one way or other. It is a thing that is happening and something that we experience. And to me, writing that was partially a healing way of processing away from this idea that gods always have to be bad or good. And like that these all-powerful beings, these cosmos beings, these things that are more powerful than us immensely, have to be what many Christians say they are, or something else. You know what I mean? Like that they can be altogether separate and complex, and we don't always have to understand them. And whether that is what I end up landing on is how I feel about faith. I think it was a really powerful thing for me to move away from in my design work and like how I conceptualize gods in my games. Mm-hmm. Because having them always be like evil or good or punishing you or saving you, it began to maybe not enjoy games that included religion anymore. And I think that it ties a lot to that feeling of like Christians feeling like, well, you either have to suffer or you don't get good things and stuff like that. And I'd like to see more stuff like that explored. And I think with the giant proponent of international designers that we have now, and designers of all different backgrounds that are doing stuff on like itch, hopefully we will see that more. But like, I definitely think that like, I pulled my experience into games a lot whenever I was playing and designing and stuff. And Turn was a step because I was talking about my actual experiences. Yeah. But then moving into stuff like The Man and the Stag is more me like breaking that apart into like, how would I actually feel good experiencing this now? And where can I go from there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting to me how games can be that thing, whether that's design. It's interesting to hear you play, certainly, but to hear you talk about design as being this process by which, you sort of work through, your experiences in the past, your thoughts in the future, healing pain, maybe, using, it's not just play in your case, it's designing play that works through a lot of those ideas and thoughts. And I think that's really interesting. We did have a comment in the chat about the idea of, persecution, just worth pointing out that, in at least in our context, right? And like a lot of American Christians, certainly not persecuted, but like to act like they are when there really is real persecution of Christianity in places in the Middle East.
Absolutely. In the East. In lots of the world, there definitely is that issue. I'm speaking primarily of like white Christians in the U.S. Whenever I talk about that. So
which is no intent to erase
anyone's experience.
That's one of the things that's frustrating me about the attitude of being persecuted in North America, because it's like, that's not real persecution when there really is, I want to tell every evangelical who thinks they're persecuted to watch something like Silence or, actually like see what persecution is like. But anyway, I thank you for being tremendously vulnerable and open about all of this on the show. I really appreciate it. I feel like there's like so much more we could talk about with Turn. We didn't even talk about shape shifting. So
I'm sorry.
No, this was amazing. And I really appreciate your willingness to come on and to be very open and personal.
Absolutely. I try to be, and I assure you that there's definitely more of it to be found in all of my work, because I can't help but put myself into the stuff I make. Yeah. I think that's just how I am as a person. Yeah. So, but I'm very grateful you have me on. Is great to get to talk about this, especially in the context of some of the stuff that I've worked on. So
yeah, I'm really glad we did, and I'm really thankful for you being a guest. And today is like the perfect day to buy Beau's stuff. So where can folks once again find any games of yours to buy, since it's what you said, itch.io Creator Day or whatever? How people find it?
My work is at brebeau.itch.io. So that's BRIEBEAU.itch.io. And you can find all of my digital products there. If you need to get a hard copy of Turn and digital copies of some of my other games, they're on Indie Press Revolution. Okay. You can just search for my name or search for Turn or Behind the Mask or any of those games. And also I have some products on drive-thru, including the Trevor Project donating game that I have, which is a collection from a number of game designers called Of the Woods. It's solo games. And that's on drive-thru RPG. But most of my stuff is at brebeau.itch.io, and you can also keep touch on my website at brebeau.com, and on Twitter at ThoughtEatGames, as I have my main game social media at this time.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you say the ThoughtEatGames website? There is a ThoughtEatGames website, right?
Yeah, it's brebeau.com.
Okay, all right, cool.
Yeah, I've had some of the front page. I swear it's there. It's been a little buggy lately.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I'm going to ask Beau to stick around in my sort of digital green room here. But I've got a couple of housekeeping things, folks, that I want to kind of go over before we say goodbye. Here, I'm just going to real quick pop through. I want to thank everybody for watching. Thanks for joining us. Again, thanks to Beau for being my guest today. I really appreciate. You can. They just went through the litany of it. I was going to remind you where to go, but it's in the chat. You can click on the link right there. Go to brebeau.itch.io. It's in the chat. So check that out. And lots of other itch creators on this great day for buying itch games. Please don't forget to hit the follow button here on my Twitch channel. I'd really appreciate it. And hey, you can also now subscribe to my Twitch if you're interested in that kind of thing, and I would be ever grateful for you if you did. If you only caught part of today's show, you'll be able to watch it on demand for a brief time here on Twitch, but you can head over to allportsopen.com to watch every episode of this show afterward, or you can go to All Ports Open on YouTube and find our shows there. But if you go to allportsopen.com, you can find all of our video content and every episode of this show in the full. You can also check out more great shows on our network. There are some new Twitch streams going on from the All Ports Open network. We're really excited about our Twitch lineup. Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Time at All Ports Open on Twitch, we have a new show, Branching Paths, with Kimber and Josh, where Kimber will play a classic video game that she's never played before, and Josh will be the wizened old guide on her shoulder. I'm really excited about that show. It's going to be right after my new time slot on Mondays, so we'll be able to hopefully raid into it. It's going to be a lot of fun. And they're two of my co-hosts on No Avatars Allowed. I think it's going to be a really great show. And then Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and I think this is correct, I hope, at 7:30 p.m. at The Worst Days on Twitch are 2 nights of horror games, with 2 great casts. They're really good shows. The Tuesday stream's been going on for a while, but they're starting a new adventure. The Wednesday stream is a new cast and a completely new adventure. Really fun horror. I'm really excited about both of those shows. So you should check out at The Worst Days. That's the Apon Games Twitch feed. And then on Thursdays at All Ports Open on Twitch, we live stream our recording of No Avatars Allowed with yours truly and my other really great co-hosts. That's our Video Game and Theology podcast. We also have a bunch of great podcasts you should check out. Delinquent Comics, Pot of Love, and then all the great shows on the network that I'm not a part of. So there's going to be an ad for one of them, Blokebusters, in just a minute when we wrap this show up. So you can check that out. That's allportsopen.com. Huge thanks to Joshua Wise, my Apon co-founder, for the artwork here on my stream and everything he does for our network. And thanks to Dr. Octorock for the use of his music before and after the show. I'm That Gamer Priest. I'm Ben. We'll be back in August at our new schedule on Mondays at 7:30 p.m. Keep an eye out for that. I hope that you enjoy the holiest and happiest of hours. Have a great weekend, everyone, and I will see you all very soon.
What is it, honey?
It's that darn ghost again. He just won't leave us alone. I guess we're just going to have to move.
No, wait. Don't worry. We're not moving. He is.
Who are you going to call?
Blockbusters. Actually, we know nothing about catching ghosts other than what we saw in that old cartoon. But if you want a podcast where we talk about film, TV, random tangents that leave you wondering what the hell was that all about, and the occasional nugget of wisdom, then we're the ones for you. And if you act now, you can listen to our entire back catalogue for free.
Did you say free?
Yes, I did. So go now to your nearest podcatching device, shake off the ectoplasm, and download us today. Warning, listening to Blockbusters can lead to stomach cramps from laughing, headaches from attempting to remember what tangent they went on this time, and a worn-out section of your device's screen/keyboard as you smash the replay button over and over until the next episode arrives. If your Blockbusters episode lasts longer than 4 hours, tell your doctor so he can listen as well.